Hello, I'm Larry Wilson, and welcome to this last segment in our study on Daniel 8. We have examined Daniel 8 rather closely. There is much to understand in these so few verses that encompass so much. We've looked at the starry hosts, we've looked at the daily, we've looked at the horn power that comes out of the north, out of the four winds. We've discussed how that he's a stern-faced king and that when rebels are completely wicked, Paul says that God sends a strong delusion because they refuse to love the truth. All of these things come together with a precision that is just mind-boggling. And I hope that you have done due diligence in studying Daniel 8, and I hope that you will review these three seminars that I've done on Daniel 8, today being the third seminar and the final seminar on Daniel 8. In next month's broadcast, I'm going to close our study on Daniel by looking at the vision that starts with Daniel 10 and goes through Daniel 12. And I think you will find some very fascinating things in that study as well. Right now, we want to focus in on the 2300 evenings and mornings mentioned in Daniel 8:14, and the gross confusion that centers on those prophetic words, and why it's so difficult for people to put these pieces together. Well, let's see if I can help you understand how this flows together with an amazing precision. Let's go to the computer screen and let's begin with this thought. God used the language, and in the Hebrew, the word Arab boger, the two words Arab and boger, evenings and mornings, are clearly stated, 2300 evenings and mornings. Why did God use Arab boger instead of just saying 2300 days? That's a good question. That's a puzzling question. I think this is the answer. God emphasizes the operation of the daily services in heaven's temple by declaring the time period as 2300 services. 2300 years of services. In other words, the daily is a service that goes on in heaven evening and morning. Evening and morning. And we know that because such a service was conducted in the earthly tabernacle. God required it because it's a shadow on earth of what is literally taking place in heaven. And the neat thing about the evening and morning services is that people who had special prayers and petitions would go to the tabernacle on earth, and as the priest would sprinkle the incense on the altar of incense, they would pray so that their prayers might go up with a sweet fragrance of this holy incense. And the idea was that by submitting your prayer with this sweet influence, God would hear and answer your prayer. And so that's why Daniel is praying at the time of the evening sacrifice, because he wants his prayer heard, and the angel comes to him because an answer had been given to Daniel. So 2300 evenings and mornings is stated this way because it is indicating services, the daily service in heaven's temple. God deliberately hid the details of the 2300 days because he did not want anyone to figure out the location of the 2300 days until the time would come for his children to understand the presence of the true temple in heaven where Jesus serves as our high priest. If the disciples had all known that it was going to be at least 2,300 years before Jesus would return, what would that have done to them? Destroyed their faith. It would have destroyed the Christian movement. God sealed up the book of Daniel until the time of the end so that all of these things would come together at the time of the end. Now, it is true that when 1844 came along, a Baptist evangelist by the name of William Miller did figure out where the 2,300 days belonged. Bless his heart, he got the time right, but he got the event wrong. And this has been a problem because of Miller's failure and the Millerite movement, which imploded in 1844 when Jesus didn't come. He thought Jesus was coming, and the temple was the earth, and he was going to cleanse the earth and set up his kingdom. When that didn't happen, the prophetic understanding of the Miller's movement largely imploded. Later, a group of people that took the name Seventh-day Adventists concluded that the 2,300 days of Daniel 8:14 were correctly located, but they pointed to a service and to an event that would transpire in heaven, and that where Jesus, as our high priest, would conduct a service in the judgment of the dead in heaven. To my knowledge, Seventh-day Adventists are the only people who understand that as a body of people, as a church group. They're the only people who understand that Jesus did begin judging the dead in 1844. However, Seventh-day Adventists don't understand who the horn power of Daniel 8 is. They say that he's the Pope. They think the horn power in Daniel 8 is the papacy, and of course the papacy doesn't even come close to meeting the specifications given in Daniel 8 for the horn power. The Seventh-day Adventists don't understand the opening of the 7 seals. They don't understand the meaning of the 3rd seal, for example, which aligns with 1844. So while Seventh-day Adventists, as with most religions, do have a few things right, the overall picture still remains unique to the book of Daniel, which is sealed up until the time of the end in which we now live. Gabriel told Daniel, let's go to the computer screen, the vision of the evenings and mornings. It's interesting, it's not the vision of the ram or the goat or the horn power, but it really is the vision about the most important part of all, the daily services, evening and morning, for 2,300 years. That's 2,300 years. That reaches from the decree of Artaxerxes in 457 down to 1844. This vision, Daniel, that has been given you is true. But seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. In other words, the horn power is not going to appear until the 2,300 evenings and mornings have taken place. So that's a long way off, Daniel. Daniel wrote in verse 27, I, Daniel, was exhausted and lay ill for several days, sick. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding. Well, it was beyond understanding because it was sealed up. God did not want it understood. Now, when a prophecy is about to be fulfilled, God opens the minds of searching people so that they can discover His plans. The solution to the 2,300 evenings and mornings is quite simple if you understand certain things. Let me start with this. About 12 years after receiving the vision of Daniel 8 and the 2300 days, Gabriel appeared before Daniel one evening. 12 years later, Daniel 9:21. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man, there's that text we saw earlier, how that an angel is called a man. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision 12 years ago, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. So Daniel is praying at about the time of the evening sacrifice. He wants his prayer to ascend with the sweet fragrance of the incense. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding, and I've put in parentheses, into your earlier vision. So, Daniel, I've come to give you some insight and understanding into your earlier vision. As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given. Wow, tell me God doesn't hear our prayers. Which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the earlier vision. Verse 24, 70 weeks or 77s are decreed. King James Version says determined. Some translations actually say cut off. The Hebrew word that is translated decreed or determined is actually the Hebrew word kothak, and it means to cut off. If I take a ribbon and I cut the end of it off, that I have kothak, the ribbon. 70 weeks are cut off for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. And get this, if you're faithful, if your people are faithful, Daniel, 70 weeks and 70 weeks, the visions that you have been given will be sealed up and never known. And of course, during this 70 weeks, Jesus, the most holy one, will appear. Know this and understand this from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 7 sevens and 62 sevens. We've covered that at length in the Jubilee calendar study. You should understand the 69 weeks. Now, 4 points come together in Gabriel's words that you've got to pay close attention to. First, the 70 weeks are so stated. God didn't say 490 years are cut off. He said 70 weeks because a week has a special synchrony with the Jubilee calendar, whereas 490 years would not. So when God said 70 weeks, he's talking about a period of 490 years, but by declaring it in terms of weeks, that means a special synchrony, because in God's calendar, a week always begins with a Sunday year, and the only decree of the 4 that were given, the only decree that occurs in a Sunday year is the decree by Artaxerxes in 457 BC. So, the first point I want you to notice, when Gabriel says 70 weeks, he states that and uses that language because that language has a special synchrony, which becomes very important, for Jesus dies in the middle of the 70th week. It's a Wednesday year. Yes, he dies on Friday, but it's a Wednesday year. The 2300 evenings and mornings are so stated because this is a time period that falls short of 329 weeks by 2 days. So it can't be called weeks. In other words, unto 329 weeks, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed? No, that won't work, because we have 328 weeks and 5 days in 2300 days. So the 2300 evenings and mornings are stated in terms of days because they're not full weeks. So 2300 years, if 490 years is 70 weeks, 490 years equals 70 weeks, then 2300 years is 328 weeks plus 5 days. So God gave the time period in days, evenings and mornings. The Bible says the 70 weeks are cut off, kothak, cut off from what? A small time period of 490 years is cut off from a larger time period of 230 years. 2,300 years. Notice how this flows together. The larger time period, 2,300 days, is given first in Daniel 8. Then, the 70 weeks in Daniel 9 are defined and synchronized and then cut off from the 2,300 evenings and mornings given in Daniel 8. In Daniel 9, Gabriel indicates that if Israel met the terms and conditions of God's covenant, Plan A would be fulfilled, and the visions in the book of Daniel, which are Plan B, would be forever sealed up, and they would never come to pass. Let me restate Daniel 9:24. I'm going to paraphrase it in my own words. Gabriel says to Daniel, Daniel, I'm giving your people, or I should say God is giving your people, one last chance. 70 weeks are cut off of Plan B. Plan B is the 2,300 years. 70 weeks are cut off of Plan B to finish restitution for the transgressions of your nation, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation with God for your national iniquity, and to usher in the kingdom of God and everlasting righteousness. And, Daniel, if all goes well, Plan A will be fulfilled, and God will abandon the vision and prophecy given in Daniel 8. Daniel 9 contains God's promise to Israel that he would terminate Plan B, which started ticking or operating in 605 BC, when the exile of Israel in Babylon began. We know it began at that time because in the prophecy of Daniel 2, the head of gold is Babylon. In the prophecy of Daniel 7, the lion is Babylon. And then we've got the bear and the leopard, and, in Daniel 7, representing Medo-Persia. We've got the ram and the goat. We've got the thighs of brass and the chest of silver. And so, God is saying, look, Israel, I've already started Plan B. I started Plan B when you went into exile. Here it is, laid out very clearly in Daniel chapters 2 and 7. We've already started Plan B. But, look, I'm going to cut off 70 weeks from Plan B. so that if Israel will cooperate and obey me and meet the terms and conditions of the covenant, I will abandon plan B, and everything that I told Ezekiel and have given him as a prophecy and as a promise, which of course are all subject to Israel living up to the covenant, I will honor. I hope this makes sense to you. Daniel 9, the 70 weeks prophecy, contains God's promise to Israel that he would terminate Plan B, which started ticking in 605 BC when the exile of Israel in Babylon began. The third point you want to consider here, since the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 are Jubilee units, 70 weeks represents 490 years, we know the 2300 evenings and mornings of Daniel 8 have to be translated into Jubilee units as well. Not only is the Jubilee calendar in operation, but this truth is proven to be true because you can't cut 490 years out of 6 years and 3 months, or 2300 literal days. You can't cut 490 years out of 6 years. You could do it the other way around, but the 2300 years are not the ones cut off. The 70 weeks are the ones cut off. So 490 years are cut off of the 2300 years. And that's what I've represented on the chart, and you can see how the 70 weeks are lifted out of the 2300 years, God giving Israel one last chance. Now, the real focus in Daniel 8 concerns the appointed time of the end and the appearing of the horn power. The real focus in Daniel 9 is that God would be willing to stop Plan B if Israel would cooperate. And the fifth point, the vision in Daniel 8 is called the vision of 2300 evenings and mornings because evenings and mornings point to a daily service that has been taking place in heaven's temple ever since the day of sin began. I believe that God chose the terms evenings and mornings in Daniel 8 instead of saying 2300 days. He chose the terms Arab boger. The Hebrew words are there. He chose those because a daily service is conducted in heaven's temple each evening and each morning on behalf of the people of earth. The 2300 evenings and mornings indicate that Jesus would continue to intercede on behalf of earth for 2,300 years before he would begin to cleanse heaven's temple and make up his coming kingdom. The 2300 days ended in 1844. And ever since 1844, Jesus has been going through the books of record, the books of deeds. You know, Daniel 7 says the court was seated and the books were open. The books of deeds were open. And Jesus is there passing judgment on all who will be a part of his coming kingdom and who will not. And you know, there's perfect harmony with the way the book of Revelation lines this up. Let me look at this, share this chart with you for a moment. On this chart, you see the 70 weeks over here cut off of the 2300 years. And you see how the 2300 years began in 457, just like the 70 weeks. And then you see that the 2300 years end in 1844. And you see in 1844, we have the opening of the third seal. This is where the rider is on the horse, sent out through the earth, informing the earth that there's a judgment. The rider has scales in his hand because the earth is being weighed. The people of earth are being judged. This is where the books are opened and the judgment begins. 1798 is where the little horn power comes to its end. This is when Jesus exalted. He's given an empty kingdom, and now he begins to go through the books and determine who will occupy his kingdom. And then the Great Tribulation is the judgment of the living, 1260 days. Judgment of the dead, judgment of the living. So that when Jesus comes, He's already decided who will be in his kingdom. And you can see where the horn power, the Antichrist, the devil, physically appears at the time of the fifth trumpet. It's time to review. We have just a few minutes left. Daniel 7 tells us that Jesus was found worthy and given sovereign power and a kingdom in 1798. Daniel 7 also tells us that the court was seated and the books were opened. So, a judgment process began, and a review of books of records is associated with Jesus being given a kingdom in Daniel 7, verse 14. Daniel 9 tells us the 70 weeks are cut off from the 2,300 days of Daniel 8. We know that the 2,300 days have to be years because the 70 weeks are 490 years. And because the horn power in Daniel 8 appears at the appointed time of the end, the 70 weeks and the 490 years share the same starting point. Here's the time of the end. Here's the 2,300 years. And here's the 490 years. The 490 is cut off. Plan A, if Israel had been faithful, Plan A would have been put into motion, and Plan B would have been eliminated. So, 457 BC plus 2,300 years equals 1844. We know that Jesus was found worthy in 1798 to receive a kingdom. 46 years later, in 1844, Jesus opened the third seal, Revelation 6, and he began going through the books of record to determine who would live in his coming kingdom. The process of judging the dead, and soon the judgment of the living, is how heaven's temple is finally cleansed of the record of sin. In other words, heaven's temple is currently defiled, just like the earthly temple was defiled by the record of our sins. This is why the earthly temple was cleansed regularly on the Day of Atonement. The parallel here is that Jesus, our high priest, began cleansing heaven's temple 2,300 years after the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which was issued during the time of the Ram. An event on earth is linked to an event in heaven. If Israel had been faithful to God's covenant during the 70 weeks allotted to her, the cleansing process in heaven's temple would not have taken place because the kingdom of Jesus would have been established on earth after the 70 weeks, after AD 33. Plan A would have been fulfilled. If if Israel had accepted Jesus as Messiah, he would not have returned to heaven, and Daniel's Plan B would have remained sealed up forever. The unsealing of the book of Daniel affirms that Plan B is in operation, and the stern-faced king of Daniel 8 will surely appear during the appointed time of the end. The unsealing of the book of Daniel distinguishes Plan A from Plan B, and since the 2,300 evenings and mornings expired long ago, the appearing of the Antichrist is at the door. I hope you have seen how several large themes converge. You know the truth about the 70 weeks in the Jubilee calendar. You know the truth about the identity of the ram and the goat. You know the truth about the identity of the horn power in Daniel 8. You know the truth about the pre-Advent judgment, where Jesus determines who will be a part of his new kingdom. And you know the truth about the stern-faced king who will rule over earth and set himself up, declaring himself to be God. You and I need to know these things because we are the generation that will see them come to pass. Wow. I hope you will give this study a lot of serious thought, and I hope you will watch it again and review it until all of these parts are clear in your mind. May God bless you is my prayer.